Hi folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about movies, music, art, and culture. And this week, we're actually going to be talking about an album from the R&B artist Jay Sean, titled Neon. And look, for most of this week, I was seriously considering not doing this review. And really, it's not like I'd be alone in this particular endeavor. To say this album has been overlooked is understating it. On this album's Wikipedia entry, there are precisely 2 reviews, and both of them barely scratch the surface of cursory and token. Pitchfork ignored this album entirely, and instead of reviewing this album, the AV Club opted to review the new Backstreet Boys album. And sure, I covered the Backstreet Boys album, but that's because I'm a fan and I cover pop music more than the majority of critics. Keep that in mind. The guy who bothered to review will.i.am, 303, and Selena Gomez nearly made the choice to completely ignore this guy. Now, some of you might be asking why on earth so many critics are apathetic towards this new album. To explain most of that, you need to understand the events of the pop music scene of about 4 years ago, namely Chris Brown's assault on Rihanna. While it provided ample fodder for the tabloids, the less spoken of fact was that it also created a certain tumult in the music industry. Suddenly the world had woken up to the fact that not only was Chris Brown's musical output painfully mediocre, but that he was also a generally awful human being and thus wouldn't sell the same number of records. And when Chris Brown's album Graffiti flopped in 2009, record executives got desperate to replace the woman-beating Usher wannabe that had been bankrolling their 11th yacht. So throughout 2009-2010, we got bombarded by a host of young R&B acts looking to take Chris Brown's place. Some, like Trey Songz and arguably Taio Cruz, managed to construct something of a personality and have a bit of staying power, while others scrape by through having no talent or personality whatsoever. Manufactured pop stars in everything but name. And it's somewhere in the middle of all this that we get our pop star of today, a British Indian R&B singer who calls himself Jay Sean. Now, to be completely honest, I've never had a problem with this guy. I can't exactly call him great, but he's never been offensive or unlistenable, and I can't say that either of his 2 hits were anything worth hating. However, that's also indicative of part of the problem. Jay Sean isn't bad, he's boring. The sort of studio-produced pop R&B creation who is pleasant enough to hear, but immediately forgotten afterwards. And sure, that might have worked well enough when trying to replace the greatest dearth of charisma in music, but since Chris Brown unfortunately came back, what has Jay Sean done to make himself distinctive or interesting or worth talking about? And as most music critics will tell you, there's nothing worse than reviewing an act that doesn't have the slightest iota of personality. But with all that being said, I eventually decided that I should at least say something or give this guy a bit of a chance. I mean, somebody probably put money into this album, and I figured that solitary producer might be curious to hear what the critical press has to say as he looks up from his cocaine bucket. And like it or not, I'm one of the few critics who actually tends to give pop music more of a chance. So, how does Jay Sean's new album, Neon, turn out? Well, I can say this. Neon is an album by Jay Sean. It exists. It is also not worth your time. I think that's enough for the review. What, you actually want more here? Does anyone actually still care about Jay Sean? Really? The guy has approximately 0 personality, and getting through this album without nodding off was a serious challenge. You now want me to actually provide an opinion about an artist who has jumped into the running against Jack friggin' Johnson as one of the most boring musical acts working today? I don't make that Jack Johnson comparison idly, by the way. The majority of this album contains acoustic guitar, either as the primary instrumentation of the song or as a supplementary to a generic club beat that sounds painfully dated at best. The one place the guitar does kind of work is on the album's best track, Sucka For You, but there is a hint of an edge there in comparison to the off-the-rack acoustic guitar he uses for the rest of the album. I get why said guitar was used, mostly in order to create a more intimate atmosphere, and I'll give Jay Sean some credit and argue that at least most of the time he sounds sincere and invested. Unfortunately, I can't help but feel that some of the attempts at intimacy might be a tad misplaced, mostly because of the lyrical content. Like the rest of Jay Sean's oeuvre, it's bland to the point of being manufactured by computers, but the majority of the songs either focus on Jay Sean attempting to win over a girl or a struggle with a relationship falling apart. And in the latter category, the lyrics certainly don't paint him in a flattering light. He either comes across as completely ignorant to why the relationship is failing, or like a jealous douchebag. What becomes odd, however, is that this sort of sour behavior doesn't lend Jay Sean any sort of edge or presence, and in the songs where he attempts to sound seductive or tries to pick up women, each attempt falls flat in its face. Now, admittedly, part of the problem is Jay Sean's lack of personality, But a bigger issue is that in the moments he does attempt to show some vestige of character or charisma, he sounds woefully out of his depth. And that is not even touching on the tracks that are attempting to play him off as some sort of club high roller, which come across as laughable even with the support of the guest stars. And then I figured it out. Jay Sean, as an artist, has absolutely no idea who he wants to emulate. For the latter half of the album, he seems like he has his sights on sounding like Chris Brown. But as much as I hate to admit it, Chris Brown has personality and a distinctive style. It's repulsive, to be sure, but at least it's there. And while some critics are making the boy band comparison, I don't quite buy that either. Unlike, say, the Backstreet Boys, Jay Sean doesn't have the personality or effective hooks to make his songs so catchy or infectious, even if the production might share some incidental similarities. No. Jay Sean instead comes off as a stock Disney good guy. Pleasant, inoffensive, boring, and utterly sexless. And his music, unfortunately, emulates that personality. Pleasant, inoffensive, boring, and utterly sexless. This album is apparently stuck in development hell, and I believe it, because outside of sounding like a slightly nicer version of Chris Brown, there is absolutely nothing here that would stick with the listener or appeal to much of anyone. It's not even worth my time to call this material bad. No, this album is just sterile and empty, safe and utterly homogeneous. So yeah, skip Jay Sean's Neon. You may all go back to forgetting that he existed now. That's certainly my plan. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I've got more videos coming up soon. See you next time.